My mother signed the listing authorization like she'd done it 100 times. She didn't ask me. She didn't even glance my way. Cal slid the photos across the conference table, already talking about strong comps and a quick close, while the realtor nodded like the cabin was his to sell. The room smelled like burnt coffee and copier toner. I watched my sister squeeze Cal's hand, proud, settled, certain. Everyone acted like the decision had been made months ago. No one explained why. Not once. I just sat there, noticing one missing signature line. My name is Sadie Monroe. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever stayed quiet to keep the family calm, you'll recognize this feeling. You're not the only one. I grew up in a beige split level on Willow Crest Drive, the kind of house you drove past without noticing. The lawn was always a week overdue for mowing. The mailbox leaned just enough to suggest nobody rushed to fix small things. Inside, though, everything was about appearances, especially the living room wall. It was covered in framed photos arranged just so. My sister Blair at soccer tournaments, hair in a perfect ponytail. Blair at prom, smiling like she already knew she'd won something. Blair holding her college acceptance letter, my parents standing on either side like proud sponsors. I was there too, technically, in the background of group shots. Cropped, blurry, easy to miss. No one ever sat me down and said Blair mattered more. That's not how it worked. Favoritism in my family showed up quietly, in who got praised for trying and who was expected to succeed without applause, in who was allowed to be tired and who was told to push through. I learned early that being easy was rewarded, being low maintenance kept the peace. I was 12 and Christmas finally clicked. The house smelled like cinnamon rolls and artificial pine. The TV murmured a morning show no one was watching. Wrapping paper covered the carpet like confetti. Blair tore into a long, narrow box and froze. Then she squealed. A brand new smartphone, the exact one every girl at her school wanted. My mother clapped her hands like she'd just witnessed a miracle. My dad laughed and said, "Knew you'd love it." I opened my last gift after that. A navy winter coat. Thick, practical, warm. My dad tore the price tag off a little too fast. "It'll last you years," my mum said, smiling like she'd given me a favour. I smiled back, because that's what I did. A few months later, I scored the winning goal in a district soccer semi-final. I remember the way the grass stuck to my calves, the sound of the whistle cutting through the air. I scanned the bleachers. My parents were there, but they'd arrived late. My dad is still in his HVAC uniform. My mum whispered apologies to another parent. After the game, they took photos on the field. Of Blair. She hadn't played. She was just there to support. "That was amazing, sweetie," my mum said to her. Blair laughed. "I didn't even do anything." "You being there means everything," my mum replied. I walked behind them, cleats muddy, throat tight, telling myself it didn't matter. The one place I never had to pretend was the cabin. The first summer my grandfather Graham took me there alone, I was 13. He picked me up before sunrise in his old truck, handed me a thermos of cocoa and said, "The lake doesn't wait for anyone, Sadie." The dirt road stretched out in front of us, dust rising behind the tyres. When we arrived, the water caught the early light and threw it back in ripples. The cabin sat a little crooked, paint peeling, screen door never quite closing right. It smelled like pine, oil, and old paperbacks. It felt like stepping into a life where I wasn't measured against anyone else. Blair never came, too busy. Too bored. Jace came once, lasted an hour, then asked about Wi-Fi. But I stayed. I swept the dock with a broom taller than me. I stacked firewood. I held the flashlight while Grandpa fixed things that didn't really need fixing. At night, we played checkers under a single lamp. He told stories about building the place with my grandmother, about every nail having a reason. One evening, he tapped the wall and said, "This place fits you." He didn't say it as encouragement. He said it like a fact. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time someone chose me without asking what I'd become. As I got older, the pattern didn't change. It just got better at hiding. If Blair missed a holiday because of work or friends, my mother called it ambition. If I stayed home to help cook or clean because someone had to, it was framed as good practice. When Blair forgot a birthday, she was overwhelmed. When I forgot to bring in the mail, it was a lecture. None of it was loud. That was the part that made it stick. When I was 15, I woke up one night to voices in the kitchen. The house was dark except for the refrigerator light spilling across the tile. I stood at the end of the hallway, barefoot, listening. My dad sounded tired. "We can't keep using your father's money like this," he said. My mother's voice snapped back, sharp but controlled. "Blair's tuition isn't using money. It's an investment." Dad understands that. There was a pause. "And Sadie?" my dad asked. Another pause, longer. "She's fine," my mum said finally. "She doesn't need the same help. Blair's the one who'll go far." I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling until morning. I didn't cry. I didn't confront them. I just learned where I stood. Quietly, permanently. By the time I left for college, Grandpa Graham's health had started to slip. Nothing dramatic at first. Forgetting appointments. Losing words mid-sentence. Then, a mild stroke during my sophomore year. Blair sent flowers. Jace posted a photo from the hospital with a caption about family. I drove 3 hours home and sat beside Grandpa's bed, listening to the machines hum. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "You don't have to miss class for this." "I don't mind," I told him. He nodded. "You always show up." After he was discharged, I made a decision without announcing it. I moved back. I took a marketing job at a small local company. It paid enough. It kept me close. Blair moved to the city with Cal. Jace bounced between jobs. My parents praised them constantly. Independent. Driven. On their way. I was just around. Being around meant picking up prescriptions, driving to appointments, fixing the loose step on the porch, sitting with Grandpa on nights he couldn't sleep. Once, while I was lining up his pills in a plastic organizer, he watched me for a long time. "Someone should be taking care of you too," he said. I laughed it off. I didn't know what else to do. A few months later, on one of his better evenings, he looked up from his recliner and said, "I made some decisions about the cabin." I asked what he meant. He waved it off, said he was tired. I didn't push. I assumed family meant things would work out. I didn't understand then that families don't always erase you by accident. Sometimes they practice first. Thanksgiving came early that year, the cold settling in before anyone was ready. The sky was the colour of brushed steel, and every breath felt heavier than the last. My grandmother's dining room was too small for all of us, so half the adults balanced plates on their laps. The turkey sat in the centre, steaming, untouched for a moment longer than usual. That should have been my warning. Uncle Dale carved the bird like he was performing surgery. He liked attention, especially when money was involved. "You all know," he said, loud enough to carry, "when Graham goes, that cabin's going to make one hell of a down payment." Laughter rolled around the table. Forks clinked. Someone poured more wine. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The cabin wasn't a down payment. It was morning on the dock. It was cold hands wrapped around a chipped mug. It was the only place I didn't feel measured. Jace raised his beer. "Dibs on the boat!" Blair leaned forward, animated. "Honestly, we could Airbnb it. I've already got ideas." Cal nodded, already calculating. "The market up there is strong. With a few updates, the return could be solid." No one looked at me. Not once. I stared at the cranberry sauce, my heart thudding too loudly. I told myself it was just talk. Families talk. Families joke. But talk settles. It becomes an expectation. It becomes a plan. After dinner, I stepped out onto the back porch for air. The cold cut through my sweater, sharp and clean. Inside, laughter rose and fell. Plates clinked. They were already dividing something that didn't feel like it belonged to them. When I went back in, Grandpa was sitting alone at the table, turning an empty mug in his hands. "They forget what things really cost," he said quietly. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. Not long after that, his health dropped fast. Hospital visits piled up. Nights when he called because he couldn't breathe right. Every time I drove over. Rain, snow, dead tired. It didn't matter. My parents thanked me in passing, the way you thank someone for picking up milk. Gratitude without weight. After the funeral, everything moved too fast. Casseroles filled the fridge. The house smelled like lilies and coffee gone cold. People whispered about the estate before the dirt on the grave had settled. Blair mentioned her wedding budget. Jace joked about finally catching a break. I sat beside Grandma Evelyn, holding her shaking hand. "He made arrangements," she whispered. "Your grandfather wasn't careless. Don't let them tell you otherwise." A week later, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off paperwork from the funeral home. They were at the kitchen table when I walked in. Dad had envelopes spread out. Mom's laptop snapped shut the second she saw me. "We're just talking about future things," she said too quickly. "What things?" I asked. "Grown-up things," Dad replied. "Nothing you need to worry about." That sentence followed me my whole life. It used to sound like protection. Now it sounded like a door closing. A few days after that, Grandma called while I was at the grocery store. Her voice was low, shaky. "I found something in your grandfather's papers," she said. "Something important?" I asked what it was. She told me to come by the next day, not over the phone. I didn't know then how many decisions were already being made without me. I only knew the air felt different, like a storm moving in over the lake, slow and quiet, until suddenly it wasn't. When I went back the next day, Grandma Evelyn looked smaller than I remembered. A manila folder sat on the coffee table, her hand resting on it like she was keeping it from floating away. "He didn't want the cabin sold," she said quietly. "Not unless you agreed to it. He made that clear." My stomach tightened. "Then why is everyone acting like it's already gone?" Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "Because they think you won't fight." I left without opening the folder. I told myself I'd come back when things felt steadier. I didn't realize steadiness was the one thing my family was trying to take away. A few days later, my mother texted me while I was at work. "Can you grab the mail? We're running late." I wasn't snooping, I was helping. The envelope from Kessler and Rowe was tucked halfway into the mailbox. The corner bent like someone had tried to hide it. When I set the mail on the kitchen counter, Mum lunged for that envelope so fast it slid to the floor. She snatched it up, crumpling the edge. "It's nothing," she said. "Property tax stuff." "Property tax notices don't come from estate attorneys." I didn't say it. I watched Dad wipe his hands on a towel and tell me, "We've got it handled." I nodded like I always had. The next crack came in the basement. I went down for tools and heard voices first. Papers were spread across the old card table like a battlefield map. Blair stiffened when she saw me. Mom stacked the papers too quickly, but not before I saw the header, projected sale value. Beneath it, a column labelled distribution. Names listed cleanly. Tanya, Mark. Blair. No, Sadie. "Why isn't my name?" "Don't start," Mum said. "You're being dramatic." Blair crossed her arms. "You didn't even like the cabin that much." That wasn't true. She knew it. They all did. I asked Jace to meet me at the diner, hoping for something human. He showed up late, slid into the booth and listened with half an ear. When I told him I felt like I was being cut out, he shrugged. "Honestly," he said, stirring his coffee, "what did you expect? You really think you deserve the same as Blair? For what?" The words landed heavy and stayed there. He left a few minutes later, patting my shoulder like the conversation had been kind. The following weekend, Dad called. cheerful. "Can you swing by the cabin and take some photos? Insurance needs them." I went. The gravel crunched under my tyres. Cal's car was already there. Inside, furniture had been pushed aside. Measuring tape stretched across the floor. Paint samples on the table. "Pre-renovation planning," Cal said. "It's just wood and nails." Blair lifted a framed photo of Grandpa and me on the dock and dropped it into a box marked "Donate." "You're so sentimental," she said. "It's exhausting." That night, the attorney called me directly. She said my parents had submitted a statement claiming I had no substantial ties to the property, no caretaking, no contribution. As she spoke, my hands went cold. That was when I understood it wasn't just family anymore. It was paper, and paper was being used to erase me. The attorney's office felt colder than I remembered. The air conditioning hummed, steady and impersonal, like it didn't care what was about to happen. A long walnut table filled the room. A box of tissues sat in the middle, unopened. Nina Kessler arranged her papers with the same careful precision she'd used on the phone. Everyone took their seats like they already knew where they belonged. Blair sat front and centre, Cal's hand wrapped around hers, his knee angled toward the table like he was ready to negotiate. My parents sat shoulder to shoulder, a quiet alliance. Jace leaned back, arms crossed, looking bored. Grandma Evelyn sat beside me, small, pale, clutching her purse with both hands. I chose the chair at the end. I wanted to see every face. Nina began reading. Formal language, neutral tone. The cabin on Maple Lake. To be sold. Proceeds divided. The words slid across the table like ice. I felt the familiar ringing in my ears, the same one I'd felt 100 times growing up when something important passed me by without stopping. My father cleared his throat, already nodding like this was confirmation. Blair's mouth curved into a smile she didn't bother to hide. Then Nina stopped. "There is an additional document," she said, her voice calm. "It was not included in the materials submitted by the family." My mother stiffened. "That wasn't—" Nina raised her hand. "It was submitted separately." She looked at Grandma. Grandma slid a sealed envelope across the table. Her hands shook, but she didn't let go until Nina had it. "This is an addendum executed by Graham Monroe," Nina continued. "Properly notarized." "Properly witnessed." She turned a page. "It states that the cabin cannot be sold, transferred, or financially leveraged without the written consent of one individual." She looked directly at me. "Sadie Monroe." The room shifted, not loudly, just enough to notice. Cal leaned forward. Blair's smile disappeared. My father's jaw tightened. Nina wasn't finished. She reached for a small recorder. "There is also a recorded statement." Grandpa's voice filled the room. Thinner than I remembered, but steady. "If you're hearing this," he said, "I want it known that Sadie stayed. She took care of me when others didn't. Don't let them erase her." The recording stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, final. Nina folded her hands. "One more thing. The family also submitted an affidavit stating Ms. Monroe had no caretaking role or meaningful connection to the property." She paused. "If that statement is inaccurate, it raises concerns of misrepresentation." My mother looked down. Blair stared at the table. No one spoke. Nina turned another page. "Mr. Monroe also established a small maintenance trust for the cabin. 5 years of taxes, insurance, and essential repairs. Ms. Sadie Monroe is named successor trustee." I felt every eye on me, waiting, calculating. My father exhaled sharply. "You can't seriously expect us to—" "I'm not expecting anything," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I'm just not signing away something you decided to take without me." Cal opened his mouth. I didn't look at him. "For now," I added, standing, "everything goes through my attorney." "In writing." I gathered my bag before anyone could say my name like it was a negotiation. I didn't feel victorious when I walked out of that office. I felt emptied out, like something heavy had finally been set down, but the imprint was still there. The parking lot shimmered in the late afternoon heat. I sat in my car for a long minute before turning the key, letting my hands stop shaking. Behind the glass doors, voices rose. Not arguments, negotiations. The sound people make when control slips and they reach for it again. I drove away before I could hear my name used like leverage. At home, Grandma called. She didn't ask how it went. She just said, "I'm proud of you," and hung up before either of us could say more. Later that evening, she stopped by and pressed a thin envelope into my hand. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's careful script. Inside were copies of emails, notes, and a list he'd kept in pencil. Dates, times, who showed up, who didn't. At the bottom, one sentence, underlined twice. If they try to take this place from you, don't let them. I laid everything out on my kitchen table. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. It wasn't anger I felt then. It was clear, the kind that settles in when you realise you're done protecting people who never protected you. The next morning, a bank notice arrived. Plain envelope. No return address I recognised. Inside was a statement for a small account I'd never seen before. Payable on death. Recently updated. The date was 2 weeks before Grandpa died. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't call anyone. I didn't ask questions. Not yet. They thought paperwork could erase me. Paper is exactly how I'm going to hold them to the truth. The first night after everything slowed down, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had gone cold without me noticing. My shoulders ached in that dull, familiar way you get after carrying something too long. I kept waiting for relief to arrive, like it was supposed to. It didn't. What I felt instead was quiet. Heavy, like a house after everyone's moved out and the echoes haven't decided where to land yet. A few days later, I drove up to the cabin by myself. No announcements, no group texts. Just me, the gravel road, and the sound of my tyres crunching through leaves. When I unlocked the door, the place smelled the same. Old wood, lake water, dust warmed by sunlight. The refrigerator hummed on its last leg. The air felt still, like it was holding its breath. Even though I now had legal standing, I moved through the rooms carefully, like a guest who didn't want to overstep. I went straight to the small corner Grandpa used as a workshop. It was nothing special, a narrow bench, a drawer that stuck. Inside, I found the old checkers set we used to play with on stormy nights. The pieces were worn smooth, the board creased down the middle. I sat on the edge of the bench and ran my thumb along the wood. He'd protected this place. He'd protected the memory. But he hadn't protected me when it mattered most. That truth sat there with me. It didn't explode. It just stayed. Roy Caldwell stopped by that afternoon. He didn't knock. He never did. He handed me a spare key he'd kept just in case and told me the dock railing could use a new bolt. We talked about the weather, about nothing. When he left, the cabin felt less hollow. My dad texted once. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, then typed back. "Not yet." It wasn't anger. It was a boundary. Grandma called too. Her apologies came out sideways and incomplete, but they were real enough to keep the line open. That evening, I changed one lock. I cleared one drawer. I set aside one box and wrote, "Do not donate," across the top. I left the rest alone. Healing, I realised, wasn't a feeling. It was a series of small decisions made without asking permission. I would trade the cabin, the money, all of it, for one moment where my family chose me while Grandpa was alive. But I don't get to rewrite their choices. I only get to decide what I accept now. On my way out, I checked the mail. One thin envelope waited inside the box. No logo, just my name. I slipped it into my bag and locked the door behind me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with this channel. These stories aren't really about money. They're about what people do when they think you won't push back. Share this with someone who's been sidelined by family decisions, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. I read every message. Your story might be the next one I tell.